Imagine, just for a moment, that you are standing in a very small, very erratic elevator.
Okay.
And you are squeezed in there between two massive bodybuilders who, absolutely despise each other.
That is a very vivid image.
Right. On one side, you have the United States flexing its muscles with tariffs and all this America First rhetoric.
Mm.
And then on the other side, you have China threatening to basically cut off the supply of the critical minerals you need just to survive.
It is a slightly claustrophobic scenario, I mean, to put it mildly.
It's stressful,
Yeah.
but that is the actual geopolitical reality Europe is living in right now.
Yeah.
And the realization is finally hitting home. The old playbook, relying on free trade, international law, everyone just getting along, it is effectively dead.
It really is. The era of gentlemanly globalization is over. We are firmly in the era of weaponized economics.
So the mission for today's deep dive is to unpack Europe's survival strategy. We are looking at a stack of economic reports, trade analyses, and geopolitical briefings that detail this massive, urgent scramble for new friends.
Right.
The sources essentially call it a shift from being picky to being pragmatic.
Yeah, and pragmatic is the polite word for it.
Is it?
I mean, desperate might be the quiet part out loud. We're going to look at this massive pivot toward India and South America, the specific machinery and minerals at stake, and the internal roadblocks, specifically the farmers that might, burn the whole plan to the ground.
Let's start with the big picture before we get too deep in the weeds here. Why is this happening right now? Europe has been trading with everyone for decades. Why the sudden panic?
Because the two big dogs, the U.S. and China, they changed the rules.
Okay.
They are completely politicizing trade. You have Donald Trump talking about nasty tariffs and using market access as this giant bludgeon.
Right.
And then you have China using its total dominance in supply chains to threaten export bans on things like gallium and germanium.
Which are rare earth metals, right?
Exactly. Rare earth metals you desperately need for microchips and defense tech.
So Europe realizes it is stuck in the middle with absolutely zero leverage.
Exactly. If the U.S. and China are the two pillars of the global economy, and both are suddenly becoming unstable or even hostile, you need a new foundation.
You need an insurance policy.
That is exactly what this pivot is. It is an attempt to build a middle power block.
Okay, so let's look at the first pillar of this new foundation. India. This is fascinating to me because historically, India hasn't exactly been the easiest place to do business.
No, not at all.
I mean, it is practically famous for red tape and protectionism.
It was the Fortress India mindset. For a very long time, they were super skeptical of globalization. They wanted to protect their domestic industries, so they just kept tariffs high and foreign investment low.
That makes sense.
But here is where the context really shifts. India is now in the exact same boat as Europe. They are feeling the squeeze too. They have massive border tensions with China, and they are getting hammered by U.S. trade pressure.
Right.
In fact, there is this incredible anecdote in the source material regarding the Trump effect that just perfectly illustrates this dynamic.
Oh, I saw that. That involved the tariffs on steel and aluminum.
Right. So Trump had been heavily pressuring India, specifically regarding their purchase of Russian oil and their overall trade surplus with the U.S.
Okay.
He slapped them with really heavy tariffs, and India was struggling to find a way out of it. But then, literally less than a week after India signed a trade partnership deal with Europe—
The timing is very suspicious.
It's very distinct. Less than a week later, Trump suddenly lowered those tariffs on India from 50% down to 18%.
Wow. That is a massive drop. And it happened immediately after they shook hands with Europe.
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
It just shows that when a middle power like India diversifies its partners and shows it actually has options, it gains leverage.
Yeah.
You cannot be bullied as easily if you aren't standing alone. It is a bit like dating. The moment you find someone else, your toxic ex suddenly wants to negotiate.
That is a great analogy. So that is the political game. But let's look at the actual economic prize here. Why is Europe chasing India so hard? Is it just about having a geopolitical friend, or is there real money on the table?
Oh, it is the scale. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. It is currently the fourth largest, and they have a stated official goal to become a $30 trillion economy by 2047.
30 trillion.
Yeah, that is a seven-fold increase from where they are right now.
That's wild.
If Europe gets a foothold in that market now, the payoff is generational. And the trade deal they are currently negotiating is incredibly aggressive.
The numbers in the report were staggering. I mean, they're talking about removing 90% of tariffs.
Yes, To give you a really concrete example, right now, if you are a European manufacturer and you want to sell a car in India, you are hit with a tariff of up to 110%.
110%. So you are literally buying the car twice over.
More than twice over. It makes European cars completely prohibitively expensive for most Indians.
Yeah, obviously.
But under this new deal, that tariff drops to 10%.
Wow.
And conversely, European tariffs on Indian raw materials would drop from 10% to 0%. It effectively opens the floodgates for trade in both directions.
Yeah, but there is a structural quirk in India's economy that the source has highlighted, and I think this is really important for you to understand.
It is crucial.
Usually, a country develops in steps. You do agriculture, then you build factories, the industrial phase, and then you become a service economy.
Right, the classic development ladder.
But India, they skipped a run.
They did. Because of their large English-speaking population and a heavy focus on education, India basically leapfrogged the industrial phase and went straight to services. IT, software, call centers, back-end banking.
Right.
It is arguably already a service superpower.
Which sounds great on paper until you realize you have 1.4 billion people. You cannot employ 1 billion people in call centers.
Precisely. Prime Minister Modi realizes he has a massive employment gap. He needs to backfill that missing industrial phase. He needs factories, he needs assembly lines, he needs to build things.
And who is really, really good at building factories and machinery?
Europe. Germany specifically, but Europe as a whole, that is the perfect match.
Yeah.
India is hungry for European investment and industrial partnerships to build up that manufacturing base.
Yeah.
It is a completely symbiotic relationship. Europe needs the market. India needs the blueprint.
However, we do have to talk about the pragmatism aspect again, because the sources mentioned that agriculture was largely left out of the India deal.
Yes, this is the big compromise. Indian farmers are a massive voting bloc. We are talking hundreds of millions of people, many of whom are living in poverty with subsistence farming. The Indian government protects them fiercely. In the past, Europe might have insisted on access to that agricultural market. They would have said, no deal unless we can sell our cheese and our wine.
And that would have just killed the deal.
It always did kill it in the past. But this time, Europe said, okay, we get it. We will leave agriculture out.
Wow.
It shows how desperate Europe is to get the deal signed. They're willing to compromise on things they wouldn't have even considered 10 years ago.
Okay, so that takes care of the eastern flank. Let's fly across the ocean to South America. The Mercosur deal. This involves Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay.
With Bolivia joining soon, yeah.
Right. And this deal has been in the works for how long?
Feels like forever. Literally decades of talking. But recently, it went into hyperdrive. And again, the core motivation has shifted.
It's not just about selling cars anymore.
Exactly. It's about strategic necessity for the green transition.
This is the lithium connection.
Right. Europe is legally committed to transitioning to green energy. Electric vehicles, wind turbines, massive battery storage. To build all those things, you need critical raw materials. Lithium, copper, nickel.
And currently, who controls those supply chains?
China has a total stranglehold on the processing of almost all these minerals. Even if they are mined somewhere else, they almost always go to China to be refined.
Right.
Europe is terrifyingly over-reliant on Beijing for its green future.
So South America is the alternative.
They have these minerals in absolute abundance. By partnering with Mercosur, Europe significantly reduces its reliance on China. It acts as a supply chain safety net. If China decides to turn off the tap, Europe doesn't just go dark.
There was a really great case study in the notes about a Dutch company called Kayak. I love this because it takes all these high-level geopolitical concepts and brings them right down to a factory floor.
Yeah, it grounds it.
They make industrial bakery robots.
They do. And these are massive, complex machines that completely automate industrial baking. We aren't talking about a countertop mixer. These are factory-sized robotic systems.
So right now, if Kayak wants to sell a bakery robot to a factory in Brazil, what happens to them?
They get hit with import tariffs between 20 and 40%.
That's huge.
It's massive. That price hike means they often lose the contract to local competitors or, more likely, Chinese competitors who might be heavily subsidized by their state or just have cheaper production costs to begin with.
So this deal isn't just abstract politics in Brussels. For a mid-sized company like Kayak, removing those tariffs changes the math completely.
The sources estimate that for this one company alone, the deal could unlock 20 to 30 million euros in sales.
Just for one company.
Exactly. Now scale that up across the entire European engineering sector. The deal is expected to increase EU exports by 49 billion euros.
Wow.
And for South America, they get the high-tech machinery they desperately need to modernize their own industries.
So, on paper, this looks like a slam dunk. We get lithium and new markets, they get machinery and investment, everyone wins. But it isn't signed.
No, and this is where the drama really kicks in. This is the farmer factor.
We've all seen the images on the news. Tractors blocking highways in Paris, burning tires outside the EU headquarters in Brussels. It is intense.
It is a fierce domestic political conflict. Farmers, particularly in France and Poland, are absolutely terrified of this deal.
What's their main argument?
Their argument is essentially, we are subject to the strictest environmental and animal welfare standards in the entire world. It costs us a fortune to produce beef. If you open the door to South America, you are going to flood the market with cheap beef that doesn't follow those same rules.
Is that a fair criticism, or is it just standard protectionism?
It is a mix of both, but the expert consensus in the sources suggests the fears are significantly overstated.
Okay.
The deal actually contains massive built-in protections. There is a specific safeguard clause essentially designed just to calm the farmers down.
How does that safeguard work?
It is a trigger mechanism. If beef imports from Mercosur rise by just 1%, new tariffs kick in automatically to stop the flow.
Wait, only 1%. That is an incredibly tight leash.
It really is. It basically ensures a flood of cheap beef is mathematically impossible.
Right.
But in politics, perception matters far more than reality. The backlash in the European Parliament has been so severe that the deal has been completely stalled. They are now officially asking for a legal review before it can be ratified.
Legal review sounds like bureaucratic code for, let's hide this in a drawer until the election is over.
That is effectively exactly what it is. It could delay things for 1 to 2 years.
Wow.
And this is a major blow to Ursula von der Leyen and the EU's global reputation. It signals to the world, to India, to South America, that even when Europe signs a deal at the negotiating table, its internal politics might just kill it later. It makes Europe look like a very unreliable partner.
That is the tragedy of it, isn't it? The strategic logic is totally sound. So we need these allies against China and the U.S., but the democratic process is messy.
Democracy is slow. Autocracies can move fast. When you are competing with China, that speed difference is a massive liability.
Yeah.
China can just decide to invest $10 billion in Brazil tomorrow. Europe has to debate it in 27 parliaments for 10 years.
Speaking of places where China is moving fast and Europe is lagging, let's talk about the missed opportunities. The sources highlight 2 glaring gaps in Europe's strategy: the Pacific and Africa.
The Pacific is a huge what-if scenario. There was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was a massive trade bloc, originally designed by the Obama administration specifically to counter China's growing influence in Asia.
But then Trump pulled the U.S. out on day 1 of his presidency.
Right. So suddenly there's an empty chair at the head of the table. China tried to muscle in, but countries like Japan and Canada kept the bloc on life support.
Okay.
The sources argue Europe should be much more aggressive here.
Yeah.
If Europe joins forces with that Pacific bloc, suddenly the U.S. is the only major player sitting on the sidelines.
It essentially isolates the isolationists.
Exactly. It creates a global trade network that bypasses the U.S. and China entirely.
And then there is Africa. The sources call this a no-brainer, yet we somehow seem to be fumbling it completely.
It is frustrating to read about. Africa is right next door. It has the fastest growing youth population in the world. And specifically for the green transition, the potential is just limitless. Think about the Sahara Desert.
For solar power.
Solar panels, massive hydrogen plants. Europe could be producing a huge chunk of its sustainable energy right there. The geography is literally perfect.
But why aren't we doing it?
Because we are late to the party. While Europe has been holding, endless summits and writing white papers, China, Russia, Turkey, and the UAE have actually been pouring concrete.
Right.
They're building roads, deep water ports, and digital infrastructure.
They are putting money on the ground while we are putting words on paper.
Europe still has this bad tendency to treat African nations as aid recipients rather than equal business partners. The sources are very clear on this. If we don't shift that mindset immediately, we lose that market forever.
Because once the infrastructure is there.
Exactly. Once China builds the infrastructure, they own the standards.
Yeah.
It is very, very hard to displace them later.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We started with the image of Europe being squeezed in that erratic elevator. We have talked about the pivot to India and service economy, the resource hunt in South America, and the internal political mess just stalling it all out. The big question remains, Can the U.S. and China actually be replaced?
The honest answer, according to our sources, is no, not immediately. The U.S. is still Europe's biggest partner for advanced goods,
Right.
and China is just too deeply integrated into global supply chains. You cannot just flip a switch and replace them without completely crashing your own economy.
So what is the end game here? If we
Oh.
can't replace them, why go through all this trouble with these massive new trade deals?
It is not about replacement. It is about clustering. It is about creating a third pole in the world order. If Europe unites with India, South America, and potentially those Pacific nations, you create a middle power bloc, a group that is collectively too big to be bullied by either Washington or Beijing.
Safety in numbers.
Precisely. And the sources draw a very sobering comparison to Russia that really struck me as vital.
Oh, this was the part about the sanctions. Unpack that for us.
Well, think back to when the West cut ties with Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. We, the West as a whole, expected their economy to collapse overnight. We cut off the banks, we stopped the trade, we sanctioned everything.
And it didn't collapse.
It took a heavy hit, absolutely, but it didn't collapse. Why? Because Russia pivoted.
Right.
They strengthened ties with India, with Africa, with Latin America. They found new buyers for their oil and new sellers for their consumer goods.
So in a dark way, Russia actually proved that this pivot strategy works.
Exactly. They proved that alternative trade networks can keep you alive even when a massive economic power tries to crush you. Europe is now trying to build its own version of that safety net, not to wage war, obviously, but to survive the economic warfare of the 21st century.
That is a very powerful thought.
Yeah.
We're essentially building the lifeboat before the ship sinks.
Or at least before the ship gets steered into an iceberg by someone else.
So here is where we leave you today. We have outlined the plan, bold deals, new friends, strategic autonomy, but we also outline the reality. Angry farmers, hesitant politicians, and a very slow-moving bureaucracy.
The question is no longer what Europe should do. We know what they need to do. The question is speed.
Right. If Europe is struggling to pass these trade deals because of internal politics,
Yeah.
like the beef over the beef, will it be able to move fast enough to secure its seat at the table? Or will we be left watching from the sidelines while the rest of the world reorganizes without us?
It really is a race between strategic necessity and political reality, and right now, looking at the delays in Brussels, it is way too close to call.
And to leave you with one final thought to mull over. If Europe actually succeeds, if they manage to unite India, Mercosur, the Pacific, and Africa into this giant middle power bloc who actually leads it,
That's a great point.
right, does Europe automatically get to sit at the head of the table just because they initiated the group chat? Or do they just end up trading the dominance of Washington and Beijing for the future dominance of New Delhi and Brasilia? It's a whole new world order to navigate.
It really is.
That is it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.